This is Raythe from Raythe Reign. I'm an author of serialized gay romance fiction. Every week on this podcast, I'll be reading a chapter from one of my gay fantasy shifter serials called Dragon's Reign. I'll explain at the break how you can find out more about this story and others I write. So let's get to it. Chapter 70, Fired and Ice. Dad. Caden's voice sounded surprisingly calm to Valerius considering the circumstances. The moment the Dragon King had sensed Caden and Rose in the hall, he had expected the young man to storm into the throne room and scream at his father, to rant and rave, in fact, not to mention to remind Caden Bryce that he'd said no to a territory countless times before, yet here Grant was demanding that Caden get what he didn't want. But Caden was completely calm. In fact, he sounded, if Valerius was going to put a name to it, tired, maybe even sad. As Caden and Rose emerged from the hallway and entered the throne chamber, Caden looked up at Valerius and gave a wave. Valerius found his mouth twitching into what suspiciously looked like a smile. Anytime he seemed to see Caden, he found his mood improving, even when the young man was bringing trouble his way. But the view of Thomas Storn and Leonard Geisler immediately squashed that happiness. The two lawyers were clearing their throats and shifting papers in their hands. They guessed there would be a family squabble in a moment, despite Caden's gentle tone. They undoubtedly would like it to take place, if it had to at all, outside of Valerius's view. They had no idea that Caden told Valerius most everything. Unless it is some plan to go to the blow and get petted, he thought. Caden, Rose. Grant said both of their names fondly, though there was the slightest tremor in it that human ears could not have heard. Dad, hey, Caden said, continuing that calm and gentle manner as he went over to his father, completely ignoring the lawyers. Hello, Mr. Bryant, Rose said. She had her arms crossed over her chest. Her hands rubbed her own arms as if she were cold. My granddaughter hurts for them, Marban said from Valerius' left, where he stood there as if he had always stood there. There was an emotion in that voice that Valerius would not have thought possible. Jealousy, just a touch of it. Whatever Marban thought of his grandchildren, and Valerius had always surmised it was not much, Marban evidently was not fond of them wanting to be part of someone else's family. She sees the family that she wished she had, Valerius answered. Having a grandfather only healed some of her pain. I doubt I healed any of it. Come now, Valerius. I take. I do not give. Marban answered quietly, but there was a look on his face as he watched Rose gaze with such a concern at Caden and Grant that belied those words. Shoni stood on the opposite side of Valerius. In some ways, Valerius felt like he had an angel on one shoulder and Shoni and a devil on the other in Marban. It should have felt strange to have Marban there with her, but it didn't. Shoni's hands folded together in front of her as she studied Caden's father. Mr. Bryant is exhausted and desperate. He loves his son. He does not come here to do harm. Yes, but this is not the way to show it, Valerius answered her. No, but love is funny that way, she stated. Caden Bryce stepped closer to his son so that he was almost invading Caden's space. He grasped Caden's biceps and held him at arm's length for long moments, just looking at him as if to memorize Caden's face or see if there were differences. Valerius noticed that Shoni was right in that moment. Grant looked tired and worn. His worry about his son had been the one thing that had stopped Valerius from biting his head off, figuratively and maybe literally. That and Caden being upset about it. Grant embraced his son tightly. Caden's chin rested on his father's shoulder, and Valerius could see Caden's expression. Caden's eyes closed for a moment. He loved his father quite deeply. That was what was making this all the more difficult for Caden. Valerius had become a man after his father's death. He had never had to break from his father, so he could only imagine what Caden was going through now. Caden's eyes opened at that moment, and his gaze was fixed on Valerius. What do you want me to do, Caden? What can I do to help you? Valerius asked mentally. I'm not sure if you can do anything. Caden's voice came surprisingly clear. Their gift of communication was so spotty, but not now. I sort of have a plan. Valerius's eyebrows lifted. Famous last words, Caden. Caden grinned for a moment. Yeah, I know, but I get why he's doing this now. He's scared. Yes, Valerius said. I would imagine any father would be. And he's trying to control things, Caden added. Understandable, Valerius agreed. Just in the exact wrong way. Caden's smile dimmed. Because of the fear, Valerius reminded him. It's like a snake eating its own tail, Caden sighed. But like I said, I think I have a plan. I would wish you good luck, but Valerius's eyes narrowed. Don't worry. Well, you can worry, but since you're right here, even if I make a hash of it, things will be okay. But Valerius knew that Caden had to do this on his own. Caden pulled back and looked at his father. Grant stroked the side of his son's head. Are you all right? Grant asked. Yes, I'm fine, Caden assured him. How are you? You don't look like you've gotten much sleep, Dad. For a moment, Grant wavered slightly, which had Caden's eyes widening. But then Grant locked his knees. I'm a little tired. We've been working on legal briefs all night and fine-tuning the arguments to be had with the dragons. Arguments with the dragons? Caden let out a huff of laughter and pointed back the way they'd come. Rose and I just left Kayla and Ilarion squaring off in Esme's foyer. My money is on Kayla, Rose said with a quirk of a smile. Ilarion is a monster. His idea of human rights is to put humans in camps, Mr. Storn hissed. Yeah, Ilarion is something all right. Caden rubbed the back of his neck. I guess what my point is that I don't think they'll care about your arguments unless you have fire breath or water breath or, well, unless you're a dragon. All the more reason to secure your rights through the law, Mr. Geisler sniffed. Caden grimaced. Dad, I'm glad you're here. His father's eyebrows lifted and a faint smile appeared on his face. I admit I didn't expect to hear you to say that. I expected a fight. Your mother was quite certain you would want nothing to do with me. Caden smiled, but there was a sadness in that smile. Well, she's not entirely wrong. Grant stiffened slightly, but then Caden hugged him again quite fiercely. Grant softened against him. I love you so much, Dad, Caden breathed. And I love you, Caden. You are so important to me, and I want what's best for you, and that's why I'm firing you as my attorney. Caden interrupted gently. What? Grant froze. Now look here, young man, Mr. Storn cried. I do say that you have the wrong end of things, Caden. We're here to protect your interests, Mr. Geisler said. No, actually, you're here to protect your own and whatever my father wants for me. Caden pulled out of his father's embrace, though he still kept hold of Grant's shoulders. Grant looked like Caden had gutted him. Valerius took no pleasure in this, but he saw what Caden's plan was. It was a good one. It would hurt, though. This is surprising and wise of the lad, Marban said, though I do believe Mr. Bryce is not ready for it. He has been living in terror since Caden joined with his spirit. All of his actions so far because of that fear, Shioni murmured with a shake of her head. As a lawyer, he felt he could be in control of something because, as a father, he was helpless. It wasn't just about how it helped him, Marban, as you suggested before. Marban shrugged. Perhaps not entirely. I am more used to the darker side of people than you, Shioni. But what I see is a brilliant man who finally gets a chance to help a son he adores with the skills that have long been denied. Valerius grimaced. He could see how those two things were likely driving Grant. Caden continued, Dad, I really do need you. I need your advice. I need your support. I need your love. Yes, that's what I'm trying to do. To be what you need, Grant said almost desperately. He did not understand why his son was firing him if Caden needed him. No, you're trying to do what you need, Caden said with a wan smile. I want you to be honest with yourself, if not with me, Dad. What is a lawyer supposed to do? Grant blinked and said uncertainly, represent his client's best interests, and no, actually you've told me this yourself. And that is that a lawyer advises a client as to what their best interests are, but after the client makes a decision, so long as it's not illegal, the lawyer assists them in getting that, Caden corrected. Not what the lawyer thinks is best, and certainly not what the client doesn't want, right? Oh, Caden, I truly see what you are doing here, Valerius said sadly. This will strip him of his last vestige of hope. I know, but I have to do it. I see now what's happening, and I have to take control, finally, Caden answered. Grant looked flummoxed for a long moment, but then knowledge flooded his expression. Caden, it's because I'm your father too, and I know you that I'm going against my wishes. Caden stared hard at him. Color heated Grant's cheeks. I'm trying to do what's best for you. As my dad, that's fine. Though we need to talk about it. But as my lawyer, no lawyer acts against his client's desires, do they? Caden pressed. Grant's head lowered. Caden, no lawyer does that, Caden said quietly. Will he admit the truth of the boy's words? Marban muttered, stroking his chin. He is a logical man. He will admit it in time, Valerius said. Grant put a hand to his right temple as if he had a pain there. I want to keep you safe. I hope you are enjoying Dragon's Reign so far. As you likely know at this point, I write a ton of other serials just like it. If you enjoy shifters, you probably like vampires. One of my favorite vampire serials I've written is called The Abyss. Think of vampires in space, and you'll have just a taste of what The Abyss is about. In The Abyss, Anarian Grey is half vampire, which gives him special powers that none of the other space marines have. But they also isolate him from the rest of humanity and vampire kind too, except for the vampire leader, Lord Abaddon. When Anarian serves on board the vampire flagship, The Abyss, he discovers that Abaddon wants him for more than just being the first, and potentially only, human-vampire hybrid. I warn you, there is a threesome action in this, but it's a lot of fun. You can read the first 5 chapters of The Abyss for free by clicking on the link in the description down below. You've got a wonderful mind, Mr. Bryce, Rose suddenly said. A good head on your shoulders. Grant turned to her, a wry smile on his lips. But I can hear you don't think I've been using those things in regards to Caden. Rose lowered her head, then lifted it and looked Grant in the eyes. I told Caden that his parents would reject him as soon as they found out he was a shifter. Grant blinked. I want to say that I cannot imagine any parent doing that, but I know it happens. It does, far more often than you'd think. So, in truth, I never even considered what it would be like for a parent who didn't turn away, Rose said tentatively, her hands laced together in front of her. Valerius could see her extreme discomfort in opening up this way, but she pressed on. You love your son so much. And here he is with that big heart of his in the middle of, well, control of the world. No, Rose, I'm not. Yes, Caden, you are. And the fact that you don't really get that a lot of the time is what is probably driving your father to distraction, and Valerius too. Rose laughed softly when she saw Valerius nod. Your good nature is a double-edged sword. It is the reason I feel, and I think so many people do, that it's wonderful that someone like you is in power. But it is also the reason why people fear so much for you. You don't see the bad in people, even when they show you it. Caden blinked and lowered his head. Everyone makes mistakes. I can see how they got to the point they're at. Yes, exactly. You can put yourself in their shoes, even when you would never do such a thing as they have done, Rose swallowed. That's how you saw the good in me, even in Marban. That's why you have Grumpy Dragon over there allowing people to shout at him who should know better. Grumpy Dragon? Valerius lifted an eyebrow at her. Rose pretended not to see. Mr. Bryce, I get that you want to protect Caden, especially from himself. Rose gave a tremulous smile to Grant, who returned it. You're sick with worry. As a lawyer and as someone who's lived a little longer than Caden, you can see things ahead that he can't. Grant brightened. That's why you can't be his lawyer. Like Caden was saying, the truth is, Caden has got to make his own mistakes, Rose interrupted. You can advise him, but you cannot take the choices away from him. And believe me, there are so many things in the short time I've known your son that I wanted to stop him from doing because I was certain they were bad ideas. Some of them were. Not all of them, though, Caden cried. Exactly. Not all of them. And those Caden gets right, they are so right. Rose explained. You and I look and see dangers and problems and bad outcomes. Caden looks out and sees opportunities. And the thing is, I believe that it is this quality that makes you and I want to protect him from himself, that matches his spirit. Caden is the 9th dragon shifter for a reason. Rose's hands had unclenched and she was reaching for Mr. Bryce. You need to let him be who he is, even if that means he makes mistakes. Because some of those mistakes are going to teach him, and others won't be mistakes at all. Grant's reaction to Rose's words were to think deeply on them. His gaze went distant, and he seemed to be listening to a voice inside of him. Caden looked like he wanted to hug Rose and spin her around. The 2 raven shifters were twitching like birds on an electrical line. Shioni was openly crying. Valerius felt that in these words, that had been so difficult for Rose to say, that she had done more good than anyone. By the gods, Marban, how did you not squash that young woman's spirit? Valerius whispered. I like to think I nurtured it. Marban lifted his head. She's never going to stay your lackey, Valerius said. Not anymore. No, but I will still have some of her heart, Marban murmured. Valerius didn't doubt that was true. He feared it would cause Rose trouble down the line. If you feel your father is too close to this to represent you, you have Mr. Storn and myself, Mr. Geisler said. Grant came out of his thoughts instantly at their words. He shot them a look of betrayal, and then his shoulders slumped. He slowly turned to Caden. I think you are right, Caden and Rose. I am too close to this, and I've overstepped as an attorney because I am your father. That may have deafened me to what you've been saying. With all the dignity that he had remaining, Grant gritted out, I would support you if you wished to hire Thomas and Leonard. Caden immediately straightened and gave the 2 raven shifters looks of disgust. No way! They've treated you terribly. Not just today, but like for years. I'm not rewarding them for that. And Dad, you don't have to stay at their firm. If there's anything I want you to take advantage of with this dragon shifter stuff, is that you should get a position that you deserve. Mr. Storn started to make a burbling noise. No, let's not be hasty. Mr. Geisler said at the same time, truly, emotions are high right now, Caden, but I can assure you. Quiet, Grant shouted. His face flamed with choler, but then he added softly, Quiet. My son and I are talking. The 2 of you need to go. My son has said he doesn't want you as his attorneys. There's no further reason for you to be here. Grant, you can't be serious. You're our partner, Mr. Storn cried. Mr. Geisler's eyes narrowed. Truly, Grant, you are being as emotional as your son. You should think things over carefully. You don't want to burn any bridges. Grant laughed. It sounded high and shrill. I could burn that bridge and salt the earth beneath it, and you'd still try to keep me on as partner or take me back. Now. So why don't we cut the crap? Both of you best get out of here. Grant, you're understandably stressed and tired, Mr. Geisler said with a toss of his head. We'll speak later when you've rested. Come, Storn. With as much dignity as 2 puffed-up birds could manage, the men strode out of the throne room. Silence fell. Grant buried his face in his hands. Both Caden and Rose went to him. Grant groaned. I do not know whether I will have a job tomorrow. Of course you will, Marban said with a wheezy laugh. What you said to them was true, but I think you should be more interested in what Caden said about your career. I think I'm done using my son's position to get me forwarder in my career. Grant kissed his son's forehead. Now who is being naive, Dad? You wanted me to have a whole territory, but you won't take a position that you can actually fill and do well in? Me as king of anything right now is iffy, Caden said. Only iffy, Rose's eyebrows lifted. Caden, in a very kingly fashion, stuck his tongue out at her. But though everyone was smiling, Valerius was not, because Grant Bryce had set a kind of bomb and would go off unless. Valerius began, Caden, about the territory, about giving you some of mine, we should discuss it. Caden looked up at him. I would never expect you to give up territory to me, Valerius. I know that dragons don't give up territory willingly. You're actually considering it. Grant looked shocked. I never thought. Marban's eyebrows rose. So people can surprise you. If Caden wants territory. Valerius cracked his neck as his stiffness began. It was not too hard to say this. Raziel had been strangely silent this entire time and would have to agree to truly give up some territory to Caden, but really, considering how it felt about Iolaire, well, Valerius, I don't want to take anything from you. I won't. I want to add to what you have, not take away. Caden flapped his arms frantically. I just want to be here with you and, oh my. Shioni gasped and everyone gaped at her. She pointed to the mirror. It was then that he caught movement in the mirror. When Valerius looked over, he saw Iolaire and Raziel reflected there. Their heads were moving towards one another's. He saw Iolaire flap its wings eagerly. Raziel's red eyes squinted with amusement, and it let out a puff of fire. That was answered with a puff of frost. They rested their foreheads together. Caden pointed at the two dragons in the mirror. Unlike everyone else, Caden did not look surprised. That's why I don't want or need territory. They have to be together. Nothing should separate them. Don't you see? Raziel let out another puff of fire, and Iolaire met it with ice. The ice should have melted, or the fire should have been cooled, but instead the two swirled together and were equally sustained. Both dragons closed their eyes in contentment. Shioni breathed. So that's what fated mates looks like. I hope you enjoyed this week's chapter. Just a reminder that if you join Raythe Reign as a member, the membership is 15 to 20 episodes ahead of the free podcast. If you'd like to join and listen to all those extra podcasts, not to mention getting access to the other stories and manga on Raythe Reign, a link is down below.